The crystal spires of Athira Prime reached toward the endless black sky, like fingers trying to touch the stars themselves. And within those ancient towers, the 12 elder species of the Galactic Council gathered for what they believed would be a simple matter: the fate of a small blue world called Earth. Ambassador Kethvarl of the Dominion stood at the center of the great chamber, his gray skin shimmering under the cold light of 1,000 floating orbs that drifted near the ceiling like captured stars. And his 4 eyes scanned the assembled representatives with the confidence of someone who had never been wrong in his 300 years of political service. "Distinguished members of the council," he began, his voice carrying through the vast space with practiced ease. "I bring before you today a matter of galactic security that demands our immediate attention and action." The holographic display behind him flickered to life, showing a rotating image of a small planet, blue oceans, green continents, white clouds swirling across its surface like paint strokes on a cosmic canvas. "This is Earth," Kethvarl continued, "home to a species called humans, and they are perhaps the most dangerous creatures we have encountered in 60,000 years of governing this arm of the galaxy." Murmurs rippled through the assembled delegates, and the crystalline choir, beings of living gemstone who communicated through harmonic vibrations, hummed with uncertainty, while the insectoid Vethkai clicked their mandibles in what might have been concern or perhaps just boredom. High Counselor Myavis, the ancient leader of the assembly whose species had been traveling between stars when humanity's ancestors were still learning to walk upright, leaned forward in her hovering chair and asked the question that hung in the air like smoke: "What makes these humans so dangerous, Ambassador, when they have barely managed to leave their own world?" Kethvarl's thin lips curled into something that was not quite a smile as he gestured toward the display, which now showed images captured by surveillance probes, humans building, humans fighting, humans dying, and humans refusing to stop no matter what stood in their way. "They are classified as a Class 7 aggressive primitive," he explained, "which means they possess intelligence comparable to our own, but lack the wisdom to control their violent impulses. And in just 12,000 years of recorded history, they have fought among themselves in conflicts too numerous to count." The display cycled through images of human warfare, primitive spears giving way to swords, then guns, then bombs that could level entire cities in the blink of an eye, and several delegates shifted uncomfortably in their seats as they watched the parade of destruction. "They split the atom not to power their civilization but to create weapons," Kethvarl said, his voice dropping to a theatrical whisper. "And when they finally reached their moon, their first thought was not exploration or science, but whether they could use the high ground for military advantage." Ambassador Trelanak of the Scythian Collective, a being who resembled a walking tree with eyes that glowed like amber suns, raised one branch-like limb and asked, "But surely they are contained by their own limitations. They have no faster than light travel, no understanding of quantum fold technology, and their weapons are crude by our standards." "That is precisely the problem," Kethvarl replied, and now his voice carried real concern beneath the political performance. "Because they learn faster than any species in our archives, and they adapt to challenges that would break other civilizations." He pulled up new data graphs and charts that showed humanity's technological progress over the past century, a curve that shot upward like a rocket with no intention of slowing down. "In the time it took the Dominion to develop basic computing," he said, "humans went from their first powered flight to landing on their moon. And in the decades since, they have created artificial minds, mapped their own genetic code, and begun reaching toward the stars with hungry eyes." The chamber fell silent as the weight of his words settled over the assembly like a heavy blanket, and even the crystalline choir ceased their constant humming. High Counselor Myathis closed her ancient eyes for a long moment before speaking. "What do you propose, Ambassador?" "Containment," Kefvarl answered without hesitation. "The same solution we have applied to 37 other species that showed similar potential for galactic disruption. We send the enforcement fleet. We establish a quarantine zone around their system, and we ensure they never spread beyond their single world." The vote was called, and one by one, the 12 elder species cast their decisions. The Dominion voted yes. The Scythians voted yes, and even the pacifist Crystalline Choir, after much harmonic debate among themselves, voted yes out of fear rather than conviction. The result was unanimous, and with that single collective decision, the Galactic Council sealed the fate of billions, though they did not yet understand whose fate they had truly sealed. 300 warships of the enforcement fleet gathered at the edge of human space within a standard month, their gleaming hulls reflecting the light of distant stars, their weapons charged with enough power to crack planets like eggs, and their crews confident in the righteous authority of the Council's mandate. Fleet Admiral Serthanix, a decorated warrior of the Dominion who had led successful containment operations against 6 other species, stood on the bridge of his flagship and studied the pale blue dot that was Earth with something close to pity in his 4 eyes. "Such a small world," he murmured to his second-in-command, "and they have no idea what is about to happen to them. Perhaps it is kinder this way, like putting down a sick animal before it can spread its disease." His second-in-command, a younger officer named Velkoth, nodded in agreement but felt a strange unease in his stomach that he could not explain. Something about the humans troubled him, though he could not say what. The ultimatum was broadcast on every frequency that human technology could receive, and Admiral Serthanix delivered it personally, his image appearing on screens across Earth as humanity looked up in shock and wonder and fear at the proof that they were not alone in the universe. "People of Earth," the Admiral announced, his voice translated into every human language by the fleet's communication systems. "You have been judged by the Galactic Council and found to be a threat to the peace and stability of civilized space. You will surrender unconditionally, dismantle your weapons, and accept permanent quarantine within your own system. And in return, you will be permitted to live." He paused, expecting panic, expecting desperate pleas for mercy, expecting the same broken submission that every other species had shown when faced with the overwhelming might of the enforcement fleet. Instead, after a silence that stretched for nearly an hour, as the humans apparently discussed their response among themselves, a single transmission came back from the unified government that Earth had hastily assembled in the face of this existential threat. The message contained only 8 words, spoken by a woman whose voice carried no fear, no anger, and no desperation, only a cold certainty that made Admiral Serthanix feel that strange unease spread from his stomach to every corner of his being. "You should have sent more ships," she said. And in that moment, though he did not yet realize it, Admiral Serthanix heard the first distant rumble of a storm that would shake the very foundations of galactic civilization. A fury born from a small blue world that had spent its entire existence learning how to fight, how to survive, and how to win against impossible odds. The Council had made their decision, and humanity had made theirs. Now the stars themselves would tremble as these 2 choices collided in a conflict that would be remembered for 10,000 years. And the lesson written in fire and blood would be simple but eternal. Never corner a species that had clawed its way to the top of its own food chain through sheer stubborn refusal to die. The enforcement fleet moved toward Earth, and Earth watched them come with eyes that held no surrender, only the patient fury of predators waiting for their prey to step into the trap. The enforcement fleet descended upon Earth like a hammer falling on glass, and Admiral Serthanix watched from his command throne as his 300 warships spread across the orbital space above the pale blue world with the casual confidence of predators who had never known defeat. "Begin the demonstration," he ordered. and his weapons officers fired a single plasma lance at an uninhabited island in one of Earth's vast oceans. The beam struck with enough force to vaporize millions of tons of rock and water in an instant, and a mushroom cloud rose toward the heavens like an angry fist. "That was a warning," the Admiral broadcast to the planet below, "and my next shot will strike one of your population centers. Unless you surrender immediately, you have 1 hour to comply." He leaned back in his chair and waited for the inevitable white flag, for the desperate broadcast begging for mercy, for the broken voices of leaders who had realized they faced a power beyond their comprehension. But the hour passed with only silence from Earth. And when Sir Thanix prepared to give the order for a punitive strike against a coastal city, his sensor officers suddenly screamed a warning that made no sense at all. "Admiral, we have incoming projectiles from the planet's surface, thousands of them, and they are moving fast." Sir Thanix laughed at the absurdity of it. "Chemical rockets against quantum shields. Let them waste their ammunition. It will not even scratch our paint." He was still laughing when the first wave of missiles struck his fleet. And he stopped laughing when those missiles detonated with the fury of small suns' nuclear warheads, dozens of them, each one calibrated to frequencies that somehow matched the harmonic resonance of Dominion shield technology. 12 ships vanished in that first salvo, their shields overloaded by an attack that should have been impossible from a species that had never encountered alien technology before. How did they know our shield frequencies? Valkoth shouted as the bridge shook from a near miss. "They could not know," Sir Thanix replied, but his voice had lost its confidence. "Unless they somehow captured data from our communication signals and reverse-engineered our defensive systems in less than a week." The battle had begun, and it would not end the way anyone on either side expected. Human forces swarmed from the planet like angry insects defending their hive. And though their ships were crude chemical engines, metal hulls, weapons that relied on kinetic force rather than energy beams, they fought with a ferocity that the Dominion had never encountered in 60,000 years of galactic dominance. A group of cargo vessels, civilian craft meant for hauling ore between Earth and its moon, accelerated directly toward a Dominion cruiser at maximum velocity. And the cruiser's captain watched in disbelief as the human pilots made no attempt to turn away. "They are going to ram us," he transmitted to the flagship, and those were his last words before 300,000 tons of human stubbornness struck his ship at 10% of light speed. The cruiser shattered like a crystal goblet dropped on stone, and the human pilots died with smiles on their faces and songs on their lips. "They are insane," Valkoth whispered as he watched the tactical display fill with similar acts of suicidal bravery. Human pilots ejecting from crippled fighters to continue fighting in nothing but spacesuits. Human soldiers breaching airlock doors with improvised explosives and storming alien ships with weapons that ranged from military rifles to kitchen knives. But Admiral Sir Thanix was beginning to understand something far more terrifying than mere insanity. The humans were not throwing their lives away out of desperation or madness, but out of cold strategic calculation. Every sacrifice bought time, every destroyed ship provided wreckage to be studied, and every captured weapon was stripped apart and analyzed by teams of human scientists who worked without sleep and without rest. By the end of the first week, human ships began appearing with hybrid engines that combined their own chemical rockets with salvaged alien power cores. And by the end of the second week, human soldiers were carrying plasma rifles that they had somehow manufactured in underground factories. They learned too fast. The Admiral's chief scientist reported in a voice that trembled with something between terror and awe. "And what takes our engineers years to develop? The humans are reproducing in days. It is as if their entire species is a single organism designed for nothing but adaptation and war." The battle ground on, and the enforcement fleet found itself fighting not the primitive species they had expected, but a rapidly evolving enemy that grew stronger with every passing hour. Human commanders communicated through a distributed network that had no center. No leadership that could be targeted for decapitation strikes when one general fell. Another immediately took their place, and the strategy continued without pause. Human factories worked around the clock, churning out weapons and ships and ammunition from resources that should have been exhausted in the first days of fighting. But the humans simply dug deeper, recycled harder, and found ways to create more from less that defied the laws of economics. Human soldiers fought even when wounded, even when outnumbered. Even when all hope seemed lost, they crawled through ship corridors with broken legs. They held defensive positions until their ammunition ran out, and then fought with improvised clubs. They died cursing their enemies with breath that was already fading. Admiral Sothanix lost 40 ships in the third week alone, and his fleet's morale began to crack as rumors spread of the things humans did to captured vessels, not torture, not cruelty, but something far worse from the perspective of Dominion soldiers. The humans studied them. Every captured alien underwent medical examination. Every piece of technology was disassembled and analyzed. And every bit of information was fed into a vast network of human researchers, who treated the war as the greatest learning opportunity in their species' history. They are not fighting to survive, Volkoth realized during a late-night conversation with the Admiral. They are fighting to understand us, and once they understand us, they will know exactly how to destroy us. The turning point came in the 6th week, when a small team of human soldiers boarded the flagship itself through a maintenance hatch that Dominion engineers had assumed was too small for any intelligent species to squeeze through. They came armed with weapons that mixed alien plasma technology with human chemical explosives, and they moved through the ship's corridors with a coordination that spoke of countless hours of training for exactly this scenario. Admiral Sothanix found them outside his bridge. A dozen humans in battered armor who had fought through 500 Dominion soldiers to reach this point. And their leader, a woman with blood on her face and fire in her eyes, leveled her weapon at his head and smiled. "Admiral," she said, "my name is Colonel Sarah Chun, and on behalf of the United Terran Defense Force, I am accepting your surrender." Sothanix looked at her, at the 11 soldiers behind her, and then at the display showing what remained of his fleet, fewer than 40 ships out of 300. Many of those damaged beyond repair, their crews exhausted and terrified and completely broken. "You cannot win," he said, though the words felt hollow in his mouth. "Even if you destroy my entire fleet, the Council will send another, and another after that. They have thousands of ships, and you have one small world." Colonel Chun's smile did not waver as she replied, "Then they had better start building more, because we are just getting started. And by the time your council realizes what they have awakened, we will be knocking on their door." She gestured with her weapon, and Admiral Sothanix, the most decorated warrior in Dominion history, commander of the greatest fleet ever assembled for a containment, Operation walked slowly toward the humans with his hands raised in surrender. His last transmission to the Council, sent just before human technicians disabled his communications, would become the most studied document in galactic history. They do not break, and they do not flee, and they learn faster than any species in the archives. We are not containing them, but teaching them. And I fear we have made a terrible mistake. The enforcement fleet was destroyed, its survivors captured or scattered, and Earth stood triumphant amid the wreckage of what was supposed to be its subjugation. But Colonel Chun and her fellow humans knew this was only the beginning, because somewhere out there among the stars, the Galactic Council was already planning their response, and humanity needed to be ready for whatever came next. They had won the battle, but the war had only just begun. And Earth's fury, awakened at last, would not rest until the stars themselves learned to fear the small blue world that refused to surrender. 5 years of silence fell upon the Sol system like a curtain drawn across a stage. And the Galactic Council told its citizens that Earth had been successfully quarantined, a dangerous species contained, a threat neutralized, a problem solved with the swift efficiency that had maintained galactic order for 60,000 years. But in the shadows of that official story, the truth festered like an infected wound that no one wanted to examine too closely. The 40 ships that limped home from the disaster at Earth carried crews who would never be the same again. And their commanders refused to give detailed reports about what they had witnessed, choosing instead to resign their commissions and disappear into quiet retirement on distant worlds. Admiral Serthanix was listed as missing in action, a polite fiction that everyone understood meant he had been captured and was either dead or worse, a prisoner of the very species he had been sent to subjugate. The soldiers who survived spoke in whispers when they spoke at all, and their stories spread through military barracks and trading posts, like a virus that could not be contained by official censorship. They spoke of human pilots who sang battle hymns as they flew their ships into suicide runs. They spoke of human soldiers who kept fighting after wounds that would have killed any other species. They spoke of human scientists who could crack alien encryption codes in hours and reverse engineer weapons technology in days. And most terrifying of all, they spoke of the way humans smiled, not with cruelty or madness, but with genuine joy, when faced with challenges that should have been impossible to overcome. They are not like us, one veteran told a group of young recruits in a bar on the edge of civilized space. And they do not think like us, or feel like us, or fear like us. They look at death and see adventure. They look at impossible odds and see opportunity. And they look at the stars with hungry eyes that will never be satisfied. The recruits laughed nervously and told themselves it was just trauma speaking, the broken mind of a defeated warrior trying to make sense of his failure. But in their dreams, they saw those human smiles, and they woke in cold sweat wondering what else lived on that small blue world at the edge of the galaxy. Ambassador Kethfarl, the architect of the containment order, did not retire or disappear. Instead, he threw himself into a frenzy of activity, pushing for increased military production and improved defensive systems around Council space. The humans will come, he warned the Council in meeting after meeting, and when they do, we must be ready. But his colleagues had already rewritten the story in their minds, transforming the disaster at Earth into a minor setback that proved only that better tactics were needed. And they dismissed his warnings as the paranoid ravings of someone who had staked his reputation on a policy that failed. The quarantine is holding, High Counselor Myarthis assured him during one heated debate. And our listening posts report no activity from the Sol system. The humans have clearly realized that further resistance is futile. Kethfarl wanted to believe her, wanted to accept that the nightmare was over and that life could return to normal. But something gnawed at him, a persistent unease that grew stronger with each passing month. And finally he could bear it no longer. He commissioned a long-range probe to slip past the quarantine zone and observe Earth from the outer reaches of the Sol system. The probe was small and stealthy, designed to avoid detection by any technology the humans were known to possess. And it crept into position over the course of 3 months before beginning its observations. What it transmitted back changed everything. Kethfarl sat alone in his private office as the data scrolled across his screen, and his 4 eyes went wide with a horror that he had hoped never to feel again. Earth's orbit blazed with activity, not the scattered debris of a quarantined world, but the organized chaos of a civilization preparing for war on a scale that defied imagination. Shipyards hung in space like geometric flowers, their frameworks crawling with construction drones and human workers in environmental suits. And within those frameworks, warships took shape, hundreds of them, each one larger and more advanced than anything the enforcement fleet had faced. The designs were wrong by galactic standards. All sharp angles and brutal functionality where Dominion ships favored smooth curves and elegant aesthetics. And they bristled with weapons that the probe's computers could not even classify. Kethverl magnified the image and saw something that made his blood freeze in his veins. The ships bore names painted on their hulls in human script, and his translation software rendered them into meanings that spoke of fire and vengeance and storms that would not be stopped. Fury and retribution, and never again, and remember Earth. The humans had not accepted their quarantine at all. They had used the 5 years of silence to rebuild, to evolve, to transform themselves from a species barely capable of reaching their own moon into something that could challenge the very foundations of galactic civilization. But that was not the worst of it. As the probe continued its observations, it detected something moving at the edge of the system, a small fleet of human ships, painted black to blend with the void, slipping through the quarantine zone with casual ease. They were already out there, already exploring, already spreading beyond their single world, while the Council congratulated itself on a job well done. Kethverl immediately transmitted a priority alert to the Council chambers. But before he could finish his warning, his communication system flickered and died, and when he tried to restore it, he found a message waiting for him that had somehow bypassed every security protocol in existence. The message was simple, just text on a screen, but it carried a weight that pressed down on his shoulders like the gravity of a dying star. "Hello, Ambassador," it read. "We know you are watching, and we want you to understand something before what comes next. We did not ask for this war. We did not want this conflict, but you came to our home and tried to cage us like animals. And for that, there must be consequences." Kethverl's hands trembled as he read on. "We have spent 5 years learning everything we can about your council, your species, your technology, and your weaknesses. We know your shipping lanes and your military deployments and your political divisions. And we know which of your member species joined the vote against us eagerly, and which did so only out of fear." The message continued. "We are coming, Ambassador, not as conquerors, but as a force of nature that you awaken through your own arrogance. And when we arrive, we will give the galaxy a choice that was never given to us." At the bottom of the message was a timestamp showing that it had been written 1 year ago and set to deliver automatically when the probe was detected. The humans had known he would send it, had anticipated his move, and had used it to deliver their warning. Kethverl finally managed to restore his communications and screamed his warning to anyone who would listen. "They are coming." He broadcast across every channel. "The humans are coming, and they have had 5 years to prepare while we did nothing. May the ancient stars have mercy on us all, because the humans will not." The Council finally listened, but as emergency sessions were called and defensive fleets were mobilized and long dormant, weapon systems were brought online. A terrible realization spread through the chambers of power. They had given humanity exactly what it needed: time to learn, time to build, time to transform rage and grief into cold, calculated purpose. And somewhere out there, moving through the darkness between stars with patient determination, the Terran Fury fleet was already on its way, not to destroy but to teach, not to conquer but to prove, and not to end galactic civilization but to reshape it into something that would never again threaten the small blue world called Earth. The silence was over, and the storm was about to break upon shores that had never known such fury. The Terran Fury fleet emerged from the darkness between stars like a wolf pack descending from mountain shadows, and the galaxy trembled at the sight of what humanity had become. 500 warships, each one a monument to human engineering and human anger, spread across the border of Council space in a formation that military analysts would study for centuries. Not a single mass, but a distributed network. Each vessel capable of operating independently, yet connected to every other through quantum communication systems that made the fleet think and react as one. Admiral Chun, formerly Colonel Chun, now commander of Earth's entire offensive force, stood on the bridge of the flagship. Never forget, and watch the tactical display as her ships moved into position. All units, this is command, she broadcast to her captains. Remember our rules of engagement: military targets only, civilian infrastructure is off limits. And any species or world that surrenders is to be treated with respect and dignity. Some of her officers had questioned those rules when they were first announced, arguing that the Council deserved the same treatment they had planned for Earth: total suppression, permanent subjugation, the boot of a conqueror pressed against their throat forever. But Admiral Chun had silenced those voices with a single question. Do you want to win a war, or do you want to become the thing we are fighting against? The fleet moved inward, and its first target was a Dominion military outpost. On the edge of civilized space, a fortress, station that bristled with weapons and housed 10,000 soldiers who had been told the humans were coming and who believed they were ready. They were not ready. The human ships attacked from multiple vectors simultaneously, their weapons firing in coordinated patterns that overwhelmed defensive systems designed to handle linear assaults from single directions. Plasma lances carved through the stations, shields while railgun rounds, simple. Kinetic projectiles accelerated to a fraction of light. Speed punched through armor plating that had never been designed to withstand such primitive but devastatingly effective weapons. The battle lasted 47 minutes, and when it was over, the station was crippled but not destroyed, its surviving crew surrendering to human boarding parties who accepted their weapons, and then to the absolute shock of every Dominion soldier provided medical treatment to the wounded and comfortable quarters to the prisoners. Why are you helping us? One injured officer asked as a human medic wrapped his shattered arm. We came to enslave your world and kill your people. Why do you not take revenge? The medic, a young woman with kind eyes and steady hands, looked at him and answered, because we have already been the monsters, and we crossed the stars to prove we can be something better. Word of the humans' mercy spread faster than their fleet, and as the Terran fury swept deeper into Council space, something unexpected began to happen. Species that had been oppressed by the Dominion and its allies started to reach out with offers of assistance. The Vethkai were first, a race of insectoids who had been conquered by the Dominion 3,000 years ago and forced into servitude as laborers and soldiers for their overlords. Their queen contacted Admiral Chun directly through a hidden communication channel and spoke words that changed the nature of the war. We watched your kind face the Council's judgment and refused to submit. And we have dreamed of such courage for 30 centuries. Let us help you bring that same choice to every species in the galaxy. The Vethkai opened their borders to human ships, provided intelligence on Dominion military positions, and began an uprising on their homeworld that drew Dominion forces away from the front lines. The Crystalline Choir followed, transmitting detailed star charts of Council military installations along with a harmonic message that human translators interpreted as, "We voted for your containment out of fear, and that fear shames us. Let us repay that shame with whatever assistance we can provide." Other species joined the growing coalition. The Scythians, whose tree-like bodies and peaceful philosophy had made them targets of mockery in council chambers. The Luminari, beings of pure energy who had been forced to power Dominion ships for millennia, and dozens of smaller races who had suffered under council rule and saw in humanity a chance for freedom they had never dared to imagine. The war transformed from a simple military campaign into something far more complex, a wave of liberation that swept through the galaxy, offering every species a choice that the Council had never given. Join us or stand aside, Admiral Chun broadcast at every system they entered. We do not seek conquest but justice, not empire but equality. The old order is ending. And you can be part of what comes next, or you can cling to what was and be left behind. Some chose to fight, and those battles were brutal and terrible and left scars on space itself that would take generations to heal. The Dominion threw everything in hand at the advancing humans. War fleets and super weapons and soldiers who had been bred for nothing but combat. But for every human ship destroyed, 2 more seemed to take its place. And for every system the Dominion held, 3 more fell to the Coalition. Admiral Chun led from the front, her flagship, at the tip of every major assault. And her officers marveled at her ability to predict enemy movements and counter strategies before they were even implemented. How does she know? They asked each other in whispered conversations. How does she always seem to be one step ahead? The answer was simple. She had spent 5 years doing nothing but studying the Council, learning their history and their tactics and their psychology, until she understood them better than they understood themselves. She knew that the Dominion would never retreat because their culture viewed withdrawal as shameful death. She knew that the Scythians would surrender quickly because their philosophy valued life above pride. She knew that the Council itself was fragmented by old grudges and competing interests that would prevent them from mounting a unified defense. And most importantly, she knew that the key to victory was not destroying the Council but breaking its legitimacy, showing the galaxy that the great powers who claimed to protect civilization were nothing more than bullies who preyed on the weak. The campaign reached its climax at Aethira Prime, the crystal city where the Council had condemned Earth to quarantine 5 years earlier. The Terran fleet surrounded the planet, and Admiral Chun broadcast her final ultimatum. Members of the Galactic Council, your fleets are scattered, your allies have abandoned you, and your people have seen that you are not the protectors you claim to be. Surrender now, and you will face justice, not vengeance. High Counselor Maiatis, ancient and proud, appeared on the communication screen and asked the question that had haunted her since the war began. What do you want from us? Admiral Chun's answer was broadcast to every inhabited world in the galaxy. We want you to answer for what you did not with your lives, but with the truth. Not with blood, but with acknowledgement of the wrong you committed when you tried to cage a species whose only crime was being different from you. The Council surrendered, and as their fleets powered down their weapons and their leaders prepared to face judgment, something remarkable happened across the galaxy. Species who had lived in fear for thousands of years began to hope that perhaps the universe could be something other than a collection of predators and prey. Ambassador Kethvarl was found in a bunker beneath the Council chambers, clutching data tablets filled with evidence of his role in the containment decision. And the human soldier who arrested him said nothing, just handed him a device that displayed a list of names. There were 23 billion names on that list, each one representing a human who had died during the initial attack and the war that followed. These are the people who died because of your vote, the soldier said quietly, and you will remember every single one of them for the rest of your life. Kethvarl stared at the names scrolling endlessly across the screen, and for the first time in his 300 years, he began to understand the weight of what he had done. The reckoning had come, not as a massacre or a genocide, but as something far more powerful, a mirror held up to the galaxy, forcing everyone to see what they had become and what they could choose to be instead. And in the burning light of that truth, the old order crumbled, making way for something new to rise from its ashes. The trial of the Galactic Council was broadcast to every inhabited world in known space, and trillions of beings across thousands of species watched as the beings who had ruled the galaxy for 60,000 years were called to answer for their crimes. The great chamber of Aethira Prime had been transformed for the occasion, where once the 12 elder species had sat in judgment of others. They now stood as defendants before a court that represented every race that had suffered under their rule. Admiral Chun, her uniform crisp and her bearing military, sat among the judges, but did not lead them. That role had been given to representatives from the species that had joined humanity's coalition. A deliberate choice that showed the galaxy this was not human vengeance, but collective justice. The Vethkai Queen presided over the proceedings, her ancient compound eyes reflecting the light of recording drones that hovered throughout the chamber, and her voice carried the weight of 3,000 years of oppression when she spoke. We are gathered to determine the truth of what was done and to assign appropriate consequence. This is not a trial of species, but of individuals who made choices that caused immeasurable harm. One by one, the council members were called to testify. High Counselor Mayarthas spoke first, her ancient body trembling, but her voice steady as she recounted the deliberations that had led to the containment order. We were afraid, she admitted, afraid of what humanity might become if allowed to spread among the stars, afraid of their violence and their unpredictability and their refusal to accept limitations. But I see now that our fear was itself the greatest danger, and by acting upon it, we created the very threat we sought to prevent. The chamber fell silent as her words echoed through the space, and millions of viewers across the galaxy confronted the uncomfortable truth that their own prejudices had been reflected in the council's decision. Ambassador Kethfarl was the last to speak, and when he took his place before the court, he carried the weight of guilt that had been crushing him since the day the war began. I was the architect of the containment policy, he said, his four eyes fixed on the floor. And I believed with absolute certainty that I was protecting the galaxy from a dangerous and inferior species. I was wrong. And that wrongness cost 23 billion human lives and countless more from other species who were caught in the war that followed. He raised his eyes to look at the human delegation, and something like wonder crossed his gray features. But what I cannot understand, what keeps me awake in the darkness of every night, is why you did not destroy us when you had the chance. You had every right to burn our worlds and slave our people. Yet you chose mercy instead. Admiral Chun rose to answer, and her voice carried clearly through the chamber. Because we have already walked the path of vengeance, Ambassador, and we have seen where it leads in our own history. We have committed atrocities against each other that rival anything the Council has done. And we have learned through centuries of blood and suffering that revenge only creates new cycles of violence that never end. She paused, and when she continued, her words were soft but carried more weight than any weapon. We crossed the stars not to become new tyrants, but to break the cycle, to prove that there is another way, and if we had responded to your cruelty with cruelty of our own, we would have proven everything you believed about us was true. The trial continued for 30 standard days, with testimony from survivors and experts and historians who constructed a complete picture of the Council's crimes, not just against humanity, but against dozens of species who have been suppressed or contained, or simply ignored over the millennia. When the verdict finally came, the galaxy held its breath. Ambassador Kethfarl was found guilty of initiating aggressive action against a peaceful species and was sentenced to spend the remainder of his life teaching the history of what he had done, traveling from world to world, speaking to audiences young and old, ensuring that no one would ever forget the cost of fear and prejudice. High Counselor Mayarthas was found guilty of failing to prevent injustice, despite having the power to do so, and was sentenced to serve as an advisor to the new government, forced to watch as her former authority was transformed into something that would never again be used for oppression. The other council members received similar sentences, death, not imprisonment, but service. Their remaining years devoted to building the better future that their past actions had nearly prevented. When the last verdict was announced, the Vethkai Queen turned to the human delegation and asked a question that everyone wanted answered. What happens now? Admiral Chun smiled, and for the first time since the war began, the expression reached her eyes. Now we build something new. The Galactic Compact was drafted over the following months, a document created by human and alien hands working together, argued over in meetings that sometimes lasted for days, and refined through compromise and collaboration until it represented something that had never existed before, a true partnership of equals. The core principle was simple but revolutionary. The measure of civilization is not power but restraint. Under the new system, no species could be contained or quarantined without their consent. Number world could be conquered or subjugated for any reason, and military force could only be used in genuine defense or to protect species that requested assistance. The enforcement mechanism was equally revolutionary. Instead of a single dominant power, a rotating council of representatives from every member species would oversee galactic affairs, with decisions requiring broad consensus rather than simple majority votes. Earth was offered the leadership role that many expected it to claim, but to the surprise of the galaxy, the humans declined. "We did not fight this war to become rulers," Admiral Chun explained at the ceremony where the compact was signed. "We fought it to ensure that no one would ever again have the power to do what was done to us, and if we took that power for ourselves, we would be betraying everyone who died to prevent exactly that." Instead, humanity took its place as one voice among many, equal in standing to species that had traveled the stars for millennia and to races that had only recently discovered fire. The first human representative to sit in the new council chambers was not Admiral Chun, but a young woman named Maya Okonkwo, a diplomat who had spent her entire career studying alien cultures and building bridges between worlds. As she took her seat, an elderly Vethkai diplomat approached her with the question that had haunted his species since the war began. "Your people had every right to destroy us. You had the power, the justification, and the anger. Why did you not take the revenge that anyone would have understood?" Maya looked at him with eyes that carried the weight of human history, the wars and genocides, the cruelties and kindnesses, the long struggle towards something better that had defined her species since the first human looked up at the stars and wondered what lay beyond. "Because we have already been the monsters," she answered softly. "We have burned cities and slaughtered innocents and committed horrors that still shame. Use us after thousands of years, and when we finally reached the stars, we made a choice. We could carry those old hatreds with us into the void, or we could leave them behind and become something worthy of the universe we were entering." She paused, and when she continued, her voice carried a conviction that resonated through the chamber. "We chose to be better. Not because it was easy, but because it was right. And every time we face that choice again, we will make the same decision, not for your sake, but for ours. Because the moment we become what we fought against, we lose everything that makes us worth saving." The Vethkai diplomat stood in silence for a long moment, processing words that challenged everything he had believed about power and justice and the nature of civilization. Finally, he bowed his head in a gesture of respect and said, "Then perhaps the galaxy is lucky that of all the species in existence, it was humanity that was pushed too far, because any other race would have burned us all." Maya smiled and replied, "Maybe you are right. Or maybe there is something worth saving in every species, if given the chance to find it. That is the experiment we are all part of now. And I hope we prove that possibility is real." The ceremony concluded. The delegates dispersed, and across the galaxy, beings of every shape and size looked up at the stars with new eyes, no longer seeing a universe divided into predators and prey, but a cosmos of possibilities where even the smallest world could shake the foundations of heaven. And on a small blue planet at the edge of the Orion Arm, children played in sunlight that had traveled 8 minutes from their star, unaware that their grandparents had fought a war that changed everything, knowing only that the future stretched before them like an endless ocean waiting to be explored. Earth's fury had shaken the stars, and in the wake of that fury, something beautiful had grown, not an empire or a dominion, but a partnership, a community, a civilization that measured its worth not by the power it wielded, but by the mercy it chose to show. The Galactic Council had learned too late that humanity was not a threat to be contained, but a force to be reckoned with. And in learning that lesson, the galaxy itself had been transformed into something better than it had ever been before. This was humanity's gift to the stars. Not conquest, but hope. Not